I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. Thank you for watching. My name is Deborah Thomas. I am 64 years old, a retired bookkeeper who spent 4 decades keeping my husband's maritime business afloat behind the scenes. 3 months ago, Ryan, my husband of 41 years, passed away. He left behind a legacy worth $48 million and more memories than I can count. The night it all began, I was standing in my son's living room, a long walnut table stretched between us, polished to a shine, set under cold LED light that made every corner of the room feel sterile. The plates on the sideboard gleamed like they had never held a single meal. Across from me sat Benjamin, my only child, the boy I had once rocked through feverish nights, the man I'd watched walk away in a tailored suit on his first day at the firm. Now his tone was something I had never heard before. "If you don't sign this, Mom," he said, tapping the stack of legal papers between us, "you're no longer part of this family." I looked at the heading, Power of Attorney, my name in black ink, waiting for my signature, his name listed beneath mine as the sole controlling party. My hand went cold. A memory flashed. The meeting at Thomas White's law office just 2 weeks before, Daniel's attorney had sat me down, glasses low on his nose, and read the will Ryan had signed. I had been named the sole heir to every cent, every share, every property. My son and his wife Jennifer were not mentioned except to note that they had been provided for during their adult lives. I remembered the way Benjamin's face had tightened as Thomas spoke. I remembered Jennifer's lips parting, then pressing together again as though holding back a curse. And I remembered Thomas sliding a separate envelope toward me. Ryan made his intentions clear. "Deborah, he wanted you to be the steward of everything you built together." That night after the will reading, Benjamin didn't call. Jennifer didn't text. But here we were now, their dining room heavy with the scent of lemon polish and something sharper. The unspoken truth that this wasn't about grief. It was about control. Benjamin leaned forward, his voice lower, sharper. "Dad built Thomas Maritime so the family could live well. You have no idea how to handle $48 million. You'll waste it. Sign this, and I'll manage it for all of us. You'll be taken care of." I studied his face. My son's eyes had Ryan's color, but none of his patience. Jennifer sat at his side, back straight, manicured nails resting on the table edge. She smiled like we were discussing vacation plans. "Think about it, Deborah," she said. "You don't have to deal with the stress. Keep a few million for yourself. Live out your days in comfort. Leave the real work to Benjamin." My voice stayed calm. "This isn't what your father wanted." Benjamin's jaw clenched. "This is what's fair." For a moment, I let the silence settle between us. I thought about the nights I stayed up to balance Ryan's accounts when he was at sea, the meals I packed for Benjamin through school, the clothes I mended, the linens I washed, the life I built around them both. In my head, I heard the words forming, my truth, simple and solid. I used to be the one who washed every towel for that boy. Now he wants to wash my life clean out of his memory. Benjamin slid the pen toward me. "Sign it." I reached for the pen, my fingers curled around it, felt its weight. Then I set it down on the paper, not to sign, but to push it back across the table. "No." It was just one word, but it filled the room. Jennifer's smile faltered. Benjamin's nostrils flared. "You're making a mistake," he said. I stood, smoothing the front of my sweater. "I've made mistakes before, Benjamin. This isn't one of them." That night, they locked me out of the apartment I had lived in since Ryan's health started to decline, an apartment Benjamin conveniently owned through one of his real estate companies. I packed 2 suitcases from the back porch under the watchful eyes of a hired security guard and drove into the darkness toward Ryan's estate by the sea. By the time the sun rose, I had unlocked the front door with the key Ryan had pressed into my hand years ago, saying, "This place will always be yours, Debbie." What I didn't know then was that the next morning, Benjamin would come for it, storming down the driveway to take what he believed was his, and that he would stop cold when he saw who stood beside me. Before I tell you what happened, If you believe in standing your ground when family tests your worth, click like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. It helps share stories like this with others who need to hear them, because sometimes the quietest no is the loudest thing you can say. I was 22 the summer I met Ryan Thomas. Back then, the harbor was my second home. I worked as a clerk in a cramped port office logging manifests, filing bills of lading, and answering phones that never stopped ringing. Ryan was a deckhand on a rust-stained tugboat, all sun-browned skin and a grin that could split the grayest morning. I remember the first time I saw him, leaning against the rail with his sleeves rolled up, a thermos in one hand, grease smudged along his jaw like it belonged there. He had this way of looking at you, steady and unhurried, like he was measuring the truth in your face. We talked over coffee from the vending machine in the dockside break room. By the third conversation, he was telling me about his dream to own a fleet, to build a company from the ground up, so no one could tell him when or where to work. I'd heard plenty of men talk big, but there was something different in his voice. Less boast, more blueprint. When we started seeing each other, dates weren't candlelit dinners or movie nights. They were lunches on the tugboat deck, the air thick with salt and diesel. I would sit cross-legged on a coil of rope while he ate a sandwich out of a brown paper bag, and sometimes he'd pull an apple from his pocket, even with his fingers slick from engine oil. He would slice it carefully with his pocket knife and offer me the larger half. "Fuel for the bookkeeper," he'd say, as if keeping ledgers and schedules was as vital as steering the boat. By the time we married, Ryan had saved enough to buy his first vessel outright, a beat-up but sturdy tug named the Mariner. We christened it together. Him with the bottle of champagne, me with a clipboard full of invoices and a hand-painted ledger board. He handled the sea, I handled the shore. That was our pact. Then came Benjamin. I was 26, Ryan was 30. Motherhood wasn't something I had planned with any precision, but when Benjamin was born, every other priority blurred. Ryan was out on the water more often than not, and I became the constant diapers, midnight feedings, pediatric checkups, then school drop-offs, and homework at the kitchen table. For a while, I tried to keep my own small bookkeeping clients on the side, but one winter when Ryan took on a high-risk tow that kept him gone for weeks, Benjamin got sick with pneumonia. I remember sitting in the hospital room under that flickering fluorescent light, realizing I couldn't keep straddling two worlds. I let the last of my clients go, turned my focus entirely to home and to Thomas Maritime. Supporting the business from behind the scenes meant more than paperwork. I fielded calls from suppliers when Ryan was out of radio range. I kept payroll on track, even if it meant hand-delivering checks to crewmen's wives. I learned the rhythms of the harbor so well, I could tell by the smell of the wind whether the fleet would be in early or late. On my 30th birthday, Ryan handed me a small velvet box over breakfast. Inside was a silver hair clip, simple but finely made, engraved with the date we'd launched the Mariner. "Something to keep your hair out of your eyes when you're working," he said. But I knew it was more than that. It was a marker, a reminder of the life we were building side by side. I wore it almost every day, even when I was just folding laundry or making stew. It became part of me the way my wedding band was. Years blurred into decades. We grew the company from one tug to a fleet of 6, added a maintenance yard, and opened an office that didn't smell perpetually of oil and seaweed. Benjamin grew up with the sound of engines and gulls as his lullabies. He spent summers painting hulls and coiling rope, though Ryan never pushed him toward the business. We thought we were giving him the choice we never had, freedom to decide his own path. Looking back, maybe that was the first crack. Benjamin saw the comforts that came from hard work, but not always the work itself. And I, in my quiet pride, never thought to show him the ledger books late at night, the stacks of unpaid invoices I chased down, the silent worry when fuel prices spiked. Still, for most of our marriage, we were a team, even in disagreements. Ryan had a way of ending them with a nod, a half smile, and, "We'll figure it out, Debbie." And we always did. That hair clip stayed with me through all of it. Company meetings, christening new vessels, family holidays. When Ryan came home smelling of sea spray, it was the thing I reached for without thinking. The small piece of silver that said, No matter what else shifted, some things were anchored. I didn't know then how much I'd need that anchor. Not until Ryan was gone and the tides in my own family turned in ways I never could have imagined. Ryan died on a Tuesday morning in late May in the middle of watering his rose bushes. I had been inside rinsing breakfast dishes when the sound of the hose hitting the ground made me glance out the window. He was lying there on the brick path, his hand still half curled as if holding the spray nozzle. By the time the paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. They said it was quick, that a massive heart attack had taken him before he could even feel the pain. The house felt hollow after that. The kitchen smelled of roses for days. The hose still coiled in a damp heap where I'd left it. Friends came and went, bringing casseroles I barely touched. I moved through it all on autopilot. My mind replaying our last conversation. Him reminding me to check the mail for a part he'd ordered. Me telling him not to overwater the yellow blooms. At the funeral, I wore the silver hair clip he'd given me decades ago. It swayed on my head like an anchor. Benjamin arrived late, already on his phone as he walked toward the graveside, one finger pressed to his ear. Jennifer trailed a few steps behind, heels sinking into the grass. She pulled out her phone before the service even began, angling it toward the arrangements around the casket. "For the thank you post later," she whispered as if it were a normal part of grief. I stood still, hands clasped, watching the pastor's lips move while my son kept checking his screen. When the final prayer ended, Ryan's oldest crewmen lined up to shake my hand, their palms rough and warm. Benjamin drifted away halfway through, tapping at his phone again. 2 weeks later, Thomas White called. Ryan's attorney for over 30 years, Thomas had been both business counsel and friend. "Deborah, we need to go over Ryan's will. Can you come in tomorrow? Benjamin will be there as well." His office sat in a converted brick building by the waterfront. The smell of salt air still reached the lobby, mingling with the scent of old leather chairs. Benjamin was already in the conference room when I arrived, wearing a navy suit and a look that could cut steel. Jennifer sat beside him in a cream blouse, scrolling her phone without looking up. Thomas greeted me with a small nod and gestured for me to sit. He opened a thick folder, adjusted his glasses, and began to read in that steady, deliberate way of his. "I, Ryan Thomas, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave all assets, personal, financial, and business to my wife, Deborah Grace Thomas. This includes, but is not limited to, all bank accounts, investments, real estate, and full ownership of Thomas Maritime, valued at approximately $48 million. I make no provision for my son, Benjamin Thomas, or his wife, Jennifer Thomas, as they have been provided for during their adult lives." The words landed like stones in a still pond. I felt the room go quiet, the air heavy. Benjamin's face drained, then flushed dark. Jennifer's phone slipped from her hand onto the table with a soft thud. Thomas continued. "Ryan executed this will on February 10th of last year. At that time, he underwent a full medical evaluation to confirm competency. I have here the certificate from Dr. Lay stating he was of sound mind and understood all provisions." He slid the document across the table toward me. Benjamin snatched it up before I could touch it. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Dad would never cut me out. Not unless someone convinced him to." His eyes locked on mine, sharp and accusing. "What did you say to him, Mom?" I kept my voice even. "Nothing he didn't already know." Jennifer leaned forward, her tone sugar-coated, but her eyes hard. "You can't possibly run a company. Deborah, Benjamin's been preparing for this his whole life. Let him take the burden." Thomas cleared his throat. Ryan's decision was clear and deliberate. He wanted Deborah to have full control. Benjamin pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping the hardwood. "We'll see about that. This isn't over." I didn't answer. I just reached for the silver hair clip at the back of my head, pressing it lightly between my fingers, and waited for the storm I knew was coming. That evening, Benjamin called and asked me to come to his house. His voice was clipped, businesslike, the way Ryan's used to be when negotiating with a supplier. I drove over under a low, bruised sky, the air thick with the promise of rain. Their dining room looked like a photo from a home magazine, dimmed pendant lights, polished wood table, a centerpiece of white lilies that smelled too sweet. Jennifer greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and poured me a glass of wine before I could refuse. "We've been talking," she began, sliding into her chair beside Benjamin. "This situation could still work out for everyone. You've inherited so much, Deborah, more than anyone needs for one lifetime. The fair thing is to share." She said the word share like it was a gift I'd been denying her. Benjamin leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Clara's right. 48 million is a lot to manage. It's complicated. You're not used to that kind of responsibility. Let me handle it. We'll keep things in the family." I sipped the wine, letting the silence stretch. Ryan wanted me to make those decisions. Benjamin's mouth tightened. "Dad wanted the family taken care of. That's what I'm doing. But if you insist on holding on to everything, you might find your life gets less comfortable." I met his eyes. "Is that a threat?" He leaned back, his tone almost casual. "You know that condo you live in, the one near the marina? I own the building through one of my LLCs. If we can't come to an agreement, I could have your lease terminated. You'd have to move out quickly." The words hit like cold seawater. For a second, I felt as if the floor had tilted. Like I was back on a deck in rough weather with nothing to grab. My own son, the boy I taught to swim, was threatening to push me out into open water with no life ring. Jennifer reached for my hand across the table, her rings flashing in the light. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Sign over control. Keep a few million for yourself and live without the stress. Isn't that better than fighting?" I looked down at her fingers, perfectly manicured, resting lightly on mine as if she were offering comfort instead of closing a trap. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up with Benjamin's fevers, the lunches I'd packed, the times I'd mended his shirts before a big interview. All of it seemed to shrink to a pinprick in that moment, swallowed by the cold calculation in his voice. I set my glass down and stood. "Thank you for dinner. I'll see myself out." Benjamin's voice followed me. "Think about it. Mom, this is your last chance to make the right decision." Outside, the rain had finally broken, steady and unrelenting. I walked to my car, but instead of starting the engine, I sat there for a long minute, listening to the drumming on the roof. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sharp, clear knowledge that the line had been crossed. I saw Benjamin as a 5-year-old, clutching a small rubber tugboat in the bathtub. I'd bought it at the harbor gift shop with my tip money. His face lit up when the tiny horn actually worked, the sound bouncing off the tile walls. "Can I take it to show Daddy when he comes home?" he'd asked, water dripping from his chin. That same boy was now a man offering me an ultimatum at a dining table worth more than my first car. It didn't make sense. Somewhere between that bathtub and tonight, I had lost my son to something I couldn't name. Back at the condo, the security light flicked on as I opened the door. I went straight to the bedroom closet and pulled out 2 suitcases. Into them went the essentials clothes, toiletries, the folder of important documents I kept in the filing cabinet. From the top shelf, I reached for the small cedar box Ryan had carved years ago. Inside were the letters he'd written me over the decades, tied in a bundle with twine. I slipped the box into my bag. When I zipped the last suitcase, I looked around the room one more time. The furniture, the framed photos, the curtains I'd sewn myself. It all felt like it belonged to another life. I wheeled the suitcases to the door, grabbed my raincoat, and stepped outside. The hallway smelled faintly of wet concrete. I locked the door behind me, not because I expected to come back, but because leaving it open felt too much like surrender. By the time I reached the parking lot, the rain was soaking through my coat. I loaded the suitcases into the trunk and placed the cedar box gently on the passenger seat. As I slid into the driver's side, I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the window, hair damp, face set, eyes steady. I started the engine and pulled out, the wipers swiping back and forth in a steady rhythm. Somewhere out there, beyond the curtain of rain, was Ryan's house by the sea. The place he'd once told me would always be mine. Tonight, it would be my harbor. The drive to the coast took just over an hour. The highway mostly empty at that late hour. The rain kept me company the whole way, softening to a mist as I neared the water. When I turned down the narrow road that led to Ryan's house, the smell of salt and pine hit me like a wave. The headlights swept over the familiar front porch, the cedar shingles dark with damp. I remembered the summer Benjamin was 12, how he'd helped Ryan replace those shingles, his small hands struggling with the hammer, determined to prove he could do a man's work. Ryan's patience as he showed him, over and over, how to line up the nails. They had worked side by side for 3 days, and when they finished, Benjamin had stood back, his face bright with pride. "We built something that'll last." "Right, Dad," Ryan had squeezed his shoulder. "That's the whole point, son." Now I unlocked the door, the key fitting as easily as it had the day he gave it to me. The hinges creaked in the same spot, a sound that felt like a welcome. Inside, the air held the faint scent of pine wood and the trace of Ryan's cologne, the one with a hint of sandalwood he wore every day. His raincoat still hung by the door, the cuffs stiff from the last storm he'd been caught in. I set the suitcases just inside, but I didn't unpack. The ocean's low rumble came through the walls, steady and deep, grounding me. I walked through the room slowly, my fingers brushing over surfaces as if greeting old friends. The living room rug still held a small ripple where he'd once spilled coffee and laughed at his own clumsiness. On the mantel, the clock ticked faintly, keeping time as if nothing had changed. In the kitchen, I switched on the light over the stove. The warm yellow glow softened everything, the worn wood of the cabinets, the pale ceramic canisters labeled in my handwriting, the chipped edge of the counter where Ryan used to lean while telling me about his day. I ran my hand along the cool surface, remembering the countless dinners we'd cooked side by side here. I opened the top drawer by the fridge where Ryan kept little odds and ends rubber bands, spare keys, a penknife. Beneath a folded linen napkin was a small envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. My breath caught. The paper was thick and the ink had bled slightly at the curves of the letters. I sat at the kitchen table before opening it, the legs of the chair scraping softly against the floor. Inside was a single sheet of stationery. His words were simple. "Keep it and use it as you see fit. No explanations needed. I trust you." The handwriting sloped a little as if he'd written it quickly. But there was nothing rushed about the weight of those words. My throat tightened. Ryan had never been a man of long speeches, but when he said something, it rooted itself in you. I set the letter down and reached into my coat pocket for the silver hair clip. The metal was cool against my palm, the surface still smooth except for a tiny scratch on the clasp. He'd given it to me when I turned 30, saying it reminded him of moonlight on water. I hadn't worn it in years. But now, holding it in this house, it felt like the anchor I hadn't realized I'd been drifting toward. I leaned back in the chair, the hum of the refrigerator and the ocean's heartbeat blending into a steady rhythm. Outside the kitchen window, the waves rolled in, their crests catching what little light filtered through the clouds. I could almost hear Ryan's voice, low and calm, telling me that storms pass, and the tide always returns. I stayed there for a long time, the letter open beside me, my hand resting over the clip. This house was more than walls and a roof. It was the last place that felt entirely ours, untouched by anyone else's claims. Tonight, it became my sanctuary. Tomorrow, it would be the place I began again. The morning light in this part of the coast always came slow, filtered through mist before it reached the windows. I was still in my robe when I heard tires on gravel and the low murmur of voices. When I opened the front door, Thomas White stood there with his leather briefcase, and beside him was a woman in a tailored navy coat, her dark hair pinned neatly back. Behind them, a broad-shouldered man in a windbreaker carried what looked like an old canvas logbook. "Deborah," Thomas greeted me with that measured tone he always used when business mattered. "I hope you don't mind. There are a couple of people Ryan wanted you to meet. Well, re-meet in one case." The woman stepped forward. "Marina Lopez," she said. extending a hand. Her grip was warm, steady. "I handled your husband's financial affairs for the past 15 years. The man nodded. "Madison Moore, port master down at Thomas Maritime, worked with Ryan since he first tied a rope at the dock." His voice carried the easy cadence of someone who'd spent his life near water. I ushered them in, the smell of coffee still hanging in the air. We sat around the kitchen table, the same one where Ryan and I had made so many decisions, large and small. Marina slid a leather-bound folder toward me. "These are the complete asset portfolios. Real estate, investments, company holdings. Ryan kept everything in your name or in the trust, separate from any external claims. He was meticulous." I traced the edge of the folder with my finger before opening it. Inside were tabs labeled with neat precision properties I'd half forgotten we owned. Accounts with steady, quiet growth. There was no excess, no hidden mess. Just the kind of careful structure Ryan always believed in. Madison placed the logbook on the table next, its cover scuffed from years of salt air. "He told me to bring this to you when the time came," Madison said. "It's not business records, it's his own notes." The pages smelled faintly of oil and sea. Ryan's handwriting filled them. Tide schedules, repair logs, sketches of dock layouts. Then further in, words that made my chest tighten. June 12th, 2019. Benjamin asked again about selling the harbor to that development group. Told him no. "The water is our lifeline, not a bargaining chip. Deborah understands that. She sees the harbor for what it is. Work, legacy, community. That's why it should be hers when I'm gone." I blinked, the words swimming for a moment. Ryan hadn't said much about that meeting back then, just mentioned that Benjamin had ideas, but here it was in his own hand, the reasoning laid bare. Another entry, August 4th, 2021. If Thomas reads this, it means I'm not here. Make sure Deborah knows she has the final say. She's weathered storms I can't even name. That's why she'll protect what matters. I closed the book carefully, my hand resting on the worn cover. For the first time since Ryan's funeral, I felt something other than hollow grief. It was the shape of a truth. Ryan had chosen me, not out of habit or obligation, but out of trust. Thomas leaned back slightly, watching me. He didn't keep many people close, Deborah, but the ones he did, well, you're looking at them. Marina smiled faintly. "We're here for you, not because it's our job, but because Ryan made it clear you're the one to carry this forward. It struck me then this was my team now, not family by blood, but by choice. People who knew Ryan's principles, who respected what we'd built, people who weren't here to take but to stand beside me." I poured more coffee, my hands steadier than they'd been in days. Outside, the tide was coming in, the water pushing gently against the pilings. Inside, I felt a quiet shift, like the keel of a boat finding balance after a sudden wave. Whatever came next, I wasn't alone, not really. The text came just after dinner when the kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. My phone lit up with Benjamin's name, the words clipped and cold. "Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. I'm coming to get Dad's things. Don't make this difficult." I read it twice, my thumb hovering over the screen. There was no greeting, no question, not even a please, just an expectation like he was sending a courier to collect a package. Thomas was still sitting at the table reviewing some documents with Marina. I slid the phone toward him. His eyes narrowed as he read. "Let him come," he said after a beat, his voice low and certain. "We'll be ready." I looked at him. "Thomas, I'm not looking for a war." He shook his head. "This isn't a war. Deborah, it's a line in the sand. They don't get to decide what's theirs just by saying so. You've got the will, the trust, the title, and the law on your side. But you also have something more powerful. They know you're not afraid to stand alone." I wanted to believe that, but my stomach was tight, the same way it had been the first time I sent Benjamin to kindergarten and watched him cry at the door. Back then, I wanted to scoop him up and make the world gentle for him. Now, he was the one bringing the storm to my doorstep. After Thomas and Marina left, I walked through the house slowly. Ryan's raincoat still hung by the door, his boots lined up neatly beneath. On the mantel, The silver hair clip he'd given me at 30 rested in a small glass dish, catching the light from the lamp. That little piece of metal had been through every move, every season. I slipped it into my pocket without thinking. Upstairs, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were the letters Ryan had written me over the years, the ink fading, but the words still strong. I set them carefully in the wooden box I'd brought from Benjamin's place, along with the framed photo from our 25th anniversary. If Benjamin wanted to come for Dad's things, he wouldn't find them lying around. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, making a quiet list. Thomas had arranged for a notary to be here in the morning along with Madison from the harbor. Marina would be back too with copies of every relevant document. It wasn't about locking the place down. It was about making it clear that this wasn't an abandoned house he could just walk into. This was my home now. At some point after midnight, the rain started, soft at first, then steady against the windows. I thought of that night at Benjamin's, stepping out into the downpour with my suitcases, how the cold had hit me, how the sound of the door shutting behind me had echoed in my chest. I'd felt then like I was being pushed out into open water without a life preserver. But this time was different. This time I was the one on the shore watching the tide come in, choosing where to stand. By 4:00 a.m., I was dressed and ready. The house smelled faintly of the coffee I'd set to brew. I tied my hair back, fastening it with the silver clip. My reflection in the window was calmer than I expected, lined from years. Yes, but steady-eyed. The clock ticked toward morning. I knew the knock would come. I also knew that when it did, I'd open the door, not as someone waiting to see what they'd take, but as the keeper of what Ryan had entrusted to me. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I was done being told to stand aside. Just after sunrise. There was a knock at the back door, gentle, familiar. I opened it to find Ashley Martin wrapped in a wool shawl, her silver hair tucked neatly under a rain hat. She'd been a Superior Court judge for 30 years before retiring to this stretch of coast, and she had the kind of presence that made even silence feel like a verdict. She stepped inside without asking, setting a basket of scones on the counter. "I heard what's going on," she said, her eyes steady on mine. "If it comes to it, I'll be your witness." Her hug was warm but firm, the kind that told you someone had already decided they were on your side. I didn't realize until then how much I'd needed that. "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than she knew. Marina arrived next, laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She went straight to the dining table, setting up her computer and a small portable printer. "I've downloaded every relevant file," she said, fingers already moving. "Bank statements, trust documents, the updated title for the property, everything time-stamped and notarized." Madison came in just behind her, carrying a heavy binder. "I made hard copies of Ryan's harbor logs and his personal journal entries," he said. "These are the pages that mention Benjamin and his offers to sell." He tapped a flagged section. "This is where Ryan writes that the harbor will stay in the family, but in your name only." Thomas was last to arrive, his coat still damp from the fog. He set his briefcase down and pulled out a folder. "Security's on standby. 2 men from the firm will be stationed at the gate. I've also scheduled the installation of cameras this afternoon. Even if they try to twist this into some emotional scene, we'll have a clear record of everything." I felt a quiet hum of readiness in the house, as if each person brought with them another layer of defense, another reason to stand tall. When they'd settled into their tasks, I stepped away for a moment. The living room window framed the sea in soft gray light. Outside, the tide was rolling in, slow and certain, the white edges of waves folding against the shore. I rested my hand on the sill, and the memory came back in full color. Ryan, on the day we signed the deed to this place, pressing the house keys into my palm. "This is yours as much as it's mine," he'd said. "If I'm ever gone, I want you here, safe." That was years ago, before Benjamin had hardened into someone I barely recognized. Back then, the keys felt like a gesture of love. Now, they felt like a promise I was obligated to keep. I stood there a while, letting the sound of the waves work through me. Today wouldn't be easy. But the people in this house and the paper trail we'd built were more than defense. They were proof that I wasn't alone. Not really. Behind me, I could hear the quiet murmur of voices, the tap of keys, the shuffle of papers. Every sound was a piece of the wall we were building, brick by brick between my life and the storm about to knock on the door. When I finally turned from the window, I felt steadier. Not because I believed Benjamin would back down, but because I knew I was ready for whatever came next. And readiness, I'd learned, was its own kind of peace. At exactly 9:00, the sound of tires crunching over gravel broke the quiet. I stood in the living room, hands loosely clasped, watching through the front window as Benjamin's SUV came into view. Jennifer was in the passenger seat, sunglasses on despite the cloudy morning. They didn't look at the house until the engine cut off. The moment they stepped inside, their expressions shifted. They had expected me alone, maybe unsure, maybe pleading. Instead, they found Thomas seated at the dining table with a neat stack of documents, Marina with her laptop open and printer humming softly, Madison with the harbor log resting on his knee, and Ashley in the armchair by the window, shawl folded over her lap like she had all the time in the world. Benjamin's voice was clipped. "We're here for Dad's personal effects." Thomas didn't rise, but his gaze was steady. "We'll be happy to review anything that legally belongs to you, Benjamin. But first, there are a few matters to clarify." Clara crossed her arms, her eyes darting to me. "We don't have time for games." Marina turned the laptop toward them, the glow of the screen reflecting in her glasses. "This isn't a game. These are the records of every financial transaction in the last 4 years where company funds were transferred to accounts controlled by you, Benjamin. Not loans to the business. Personal expenses. They total over $240,000. None repaid." She tapped the space bar, bringing up another document. "Here are your signed acknowledgments for each withdrawal." Benjamin's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. Jennifer shifted beside him, the first flicker of unease crossing her face. Madison stood then, flipping open the harbor log. His voice was even, carrying the calm authority of someone used to speaking over the wind. Ryan made notes after every meeting about the harbor's future. Here's one from June 12th, 2019. He read aloud Ryan's exact words about refusing Benjamin's request to sell to developers, about keeping the harbor and the family under my care alone. Benjamin's hand curled into a fist. "That's his handwriting, not his voice. You've all twisted—" I stepped forward then, not raising my voice. "You're worried about losing face, Benjamin." "I'm worried about losing myself." The room went very still. It was a line I hadn't planned, but it landed with the weight of truth. His eyes flickered just for a second, like he'd heard me before he decided not to. "I'm your mother," I continued, my tone steady. "And I have spent decades protecting this family. I've done it quietly, without asking for recognition, without demanding anything in return. But this," I gestured to the papers, the logbook, the people in the room. "This isn't about hurt feelings. This is about facts. Legal, documented facts." Thomas slid a manila envelope toward Benjamin. "Copies for your records. Should you wish to contest, we'll be prepared to respond in court, but I advise against it." Jennifer opened her mouth, but Ashley spoke for the first time, her voice calm and unyielding. "I've presided over enough hearings to know when a case is airtight. If you push this, you'll lose more than you came for." Benjamin's gaze swept the room again, lingering on each face. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the quick math of pride versus probability. He took the envelope but didn't open it. "I thought you'd at least try to work with us," he said finally. "I am working with you," I said, still without heat. "I'm giving you the chance to walk out that door with dignity. What you do with that is up to you. No shouting, no name-calling. Just the truth laid out on the table as undeniable as the tide hitting the shore outside." I waited until Benjamin had his hand on the doorknob before I spoke again. My voice was low, but it carried. "There's something you don't know," I said. He stopped, shoulders stiffening, but didn't turn around. Jennifer glanced between us, suspicion written across her face. I stepped closer, steadying myself with the back of a chair. Ryan didn't always plan to leave the company to me. For years. His intention was to hand it over to you, Benjamin. He believed it would be your legacy. He talked about it often, how proud he'd be to see you continue what he started. That made him turn. His expression was guarded, but there was a flicker of something, hope, confusion, maybe both. Then why didn't he? I took a slow breath. Because one afternoon he walked into the harbor office and overheard you. You were talking to a developer about selling the property, not just the docks, everything. The slips, the warehouse, the fueling station. The sale would have gutted the community here. Dozens of families would have lost their livelihoods. His face changed, the calculation faltering for the first time. That was just a conversation, he said quickly. Nothing was decided. It was enough for him, I replied. Ryan believed in keeping the harbor alive because it kept this town alive. When he realized you didn't see it that way, he changed the will quietly without telling you. Without telling anyone except me. Silence filled the room, heavy and unbroken. Even Jennifer stayed still. Her arms no longer crossed. Benjamin's gaze dropped for a moment, then lifted again, sharper now, as if he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. I didn't push. I didn't raise my voice or fill the air with accusations. I let the truth sit between us, solid and immovable, the way Ryan had left it. You think this is about money, I said finally. It's not. It's about responsibility. Ryan entrusted me with something bigger than both of us because he knew I wouldn't sell it for a quick gain. He knew I would protect the people who depend on it. Benjamin's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he might say he understood, but the moment passed. Without another word, he opened the door. The cold morning air swept in, carrying the scent of the sea. He stepped out, Jennifer following closely, their footsteps fading down the gravel path. I stood there until I could no longer hear them, my hand resting lightly on the doorframe. I hadn't convinced him, but I hadn't needed to. The truth was no longer buried, and I had spoken it aloud, not to win him over, but to remind myself why I was standing my ground. When I closed the door, the house felt quieter, but not empty. It felt like a place where Ryan's voice could still be heard even in the stillness. And that was enough for me. The silence came first. No calls, no texts, no out-of-the-blue emails. Benjamin had gone completely dark, as if cutting the cord could erase the last 38 years of our shared life. I had given birth to him, held his hand through measles and college rejection letters, but now there was nothing but a blank space where my son had been. The silence might have been easier to bear if not for the whispers. One morning, over coffee at the small cafe near the marina, I noticed two women from the Chamber of Commerce leaning in at the next table. They didn't see me at first, but their words carried just enough. She's clinging to the business for power, one said. I heard she pushed her own son out. Later that afternoon, Madison stopped by and closed the door behind him. Jennifer's been making the rounds, he said carefully. She's not naming you directly, but she's telling people the harbor's in trouble, that you're unstable. The word landed like a stone in my chest. I'd spent decades building a reputation for steady hands and calm decisions. Now, with a few carefully dropped insinuations, Jennifer was trying to undo it. I stood at the kitchen counter, my fingers curling around the edge until my knuckles whitened. I could have confronted her publicly. I could have called her a liar in the same meetings she frequented. But what would that serve? It would drag me into the very arena she wanted public spectacle, and I refused to step into her ring. That night, I sat at the small vanity in the bedroom Ryan and I once shared. The silver hairpin he'd given me for my 30th birthday rested in its velvet-lined box. I lifted it out, feeling the familiar weight in my hand. It had always been more than an accessory. It was a small piece of armor, a reminder of who I was before anyone else's opinion tried to define me. As I slid it into my hair, catching the light from the bedside lamp, I realized I was performing a ritual. Every time I left the house now, whether to walk the docks, attend a council meeting, or shop for groceries, I wore it not to make a statement to others, but to anchor myself. In the quiet of that room, I spoke aloud just once. Forgiving doesn't mean I let you do it again. The words were for Benjamin, for Jennifer, and maybe for myself. I could forgive the hurt enough to live without bitterness. But forgiveness was not a revolving door. It was a boundary line. Once crossed, it meant something had to change. I began to adjust my routines. Meetings were held in my space, on my terms. Marina sat in on every significant discussion, not because I doubted my own memory or resolve, but because it sent a message I am not alone. Madison increased his oversight at the harbor, keeping operations running so smoothly that any rumors about instability rang hollow. The calls from the chamber kept coming. Polite invitations to clear the air, to set the record straight. I declined each one. If they wanted to know the truth, they could come to the source. I wouldn't go chasing their approval. Weeks passed, and the gossip began to lose its shine. People get bored when you don't play the part they expect. I continued my work, paid my staff, showed up to every obligation prepared and unshaken. The harbor thrived despite the noise, and slowly the noise faded. Benjamin still didn't call. Some nights that absence felt like an amputation, but in the mornings, when I pinned my hair and faced the day, I remembered what Ryan once told me. You can't control the weather, Debbie, only how you steer through it. The weather was rough now, unpredictable, but my hands were steady on the wheel, and as long as I remembered where my course lay, I didn't need the approval of anyone standing on the shore. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, tucked among the usual stack of bills and harbor reports. The envelope was hand-addressed in neat, slanted script, the paper slightly worn at the edges as though it had been handled often before it reached me. Inside was a single page folded with care. Mrs. Thomas, we wanted you to know that when my husband's fishing boat sank last winter, the emergency fund your husband established kept us afloat, literally and otherwise. We were able to pay the mortgage, keep our children in school, and rebuild enough to buy another boat. Ryan saved more than our livelihood. He saved our dignity. Thank you for carrying on his work. Grace and Peter Caldwell. They were names I knew only in passing from the harbor community. As I read it again, my eyes stung in the way that makes you stop blinking, as if holding the moment still might keep it from spilling over. I set the letter on the table and sat for a long while, letting the words sink in. The harbor wasn't just docks and rope and the smell of diesel. It was the heartbeat of families whose faces I might never see, but whose lives were tied to these waters as much as mine was. That afternoon, I pulled out the wooden box Ryan had given me decades ago, the one that held his letters, small mementos, and my own private words, from the drawer of the writing desk. I took a sheet of cream stationery and began to write. Benjamin, there are things I wish I could tell you without them feeling like accusations. You were meant to have this business, and once upon a time, we both believed you would keep it safe. But I've learned that safety isn't just about profit, it's about people. And I can't hand over something built on trust to someone who doesn't see the hands holding it up. I paused, staring at the ink drying on the page. This wasn't a letter I would send. Not now. Maybe not ever. But it was the truth. And the act of writing it was for me, not for him. I folded it carefully and placed it in the box among the others, where it would rest alongside years of unspoken thoughts. The next morning, the front door stood open to a group of high school students and their advisor, carrying folders and wearing the nervous excitement of those about to step into a new chapter of life. They were recipients of the Thomas Maritime Scholarship, a program Ryan and I had started, but that had grown since his passing. Come in, I said, stepping back to let them pass. The salt air followed them inside, mingling with the smell of fresh-baked bread cooling in the kitchen. I led them into the living room where Marina had laid out refreshments, and Madison had set up a slideshow of their future colleges and apprenticeships. As they settled in, I felt something shift. The house, which had so recently been a fortress against hurt, was now opening itself to possibility. This was not about reclaiming the past or proving a point to those who had doubted me. This was about choosing where my energy would go next. I glanced toward the wooden box on the shelf in the corner. It held my grief, my boundaries, my unsent words. But it also held the reminder that some things are worth protecting quietly, steadily, without the need for applause. The students laughed at something Madison said, their voices bright against the steady hum of the sea outside, and for the first time in months, I realized I was no longer holding my breath. A new chapter had begun, not because I had closed the door on my son, but because I had opened it to something greater than the hurt he'd left behind. It was Thomas who noticed the filing first. He came to the house on a Wednesday afternoon, his face more grave than usual, a folder tucked under his arm. We sat at the kitchen table where we'd had so many conversations since Ryan's passing, but this time, the air felt heavier. "Benjamin's filed papers to contest the will," he said without preamble, sliding the documents across to me. "He's claiming undue influence and mental incompetence." I stared at the legal language, the formal accusations printed in cold, impersonal type. My son was claiming I had manipulated his father while he was mentally impaired. The words felt like a physical blow, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. "This is standard procedure for contesting a will," Thomas continued, his voice gentle. "But I want you to understand what we're facing. He's hired Elliot Chambers. He's aggressive, expensive, and known for dragging things out." I traced the edge of the paper with my fingertip. "So this is his response. Not to talk, not to try to understand, but to attack." Thomas nodded. "It appears so. But Deborah, we have everything we need. The medical evaluation Ryan underwent when he changed the will, his journals detailing his reasoning, multiple witnesses who can testify to his sound mind. This is a desperate move, not a strong one." "But it's a public move," I said, understanding settling like a weight. "Everyone will know. The rumors will start again, but louder." "Yes, that's likely part of the strategy, to make it so uncomfortable that you'll settle rather than fight." I closed the folder, my decision already made. "Then they don't know me very well." Thomas's expression softened slightly. "No, I don't believe they do." As predicted, the filing became public knowledge within days. I could feel the shift in the air when I walked through town, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, glances that lingered a beat too long. The whispered questions: what kind of woman would manipulate her dying husband? What kind of mother would push her only son aside? The most painful moment came at the grocery store. I was selecting tomatoes when I overheard a snippet of conversation from the next aisle over. I always thought she was so quiet, the bookkeeper type, but I guess you never really know what people are capable of. The voice belonged to Helen Branford, a woman I'd known for 20 years. We'd served on the school fundraising committee together when Benjamin was young. She'd brought me chicken soup when I had pneumonia one winter. And now, she was speaking of me as if I were a stranger, a villain in someone else's story. I set the tomato down, my appetite gone. As I turned to leave, I nearly collided with Ashley Martin. Her eyes met mine, and I knew she'd heard it too. "Come on," she said, taking my arm gently. "I've got fresh-baked bread at my place and a view that helps put things in perspective." At her home, a small but elegant cottage perched higher on the bluff than Ryan's place. We sat on the back deck overlooking the ocean. The bread was still warm, the butter melting into its crust. Ashley poured tea and settled into the chair across from me. She said, her voice carrying the rich timbre that had commanded courtrooms for 3 decades. "In my years on the bench, I saw countless families tear themselves apart over inheritance. But what Benjamin is doing, this is something else. This is about control." I nodded, watching a gull wheel overhead. "He's always needed to be right, even as a child. But this feels different, like I've become an obstacle rather than a person." "That's exactly what it is," she said. "To fight this battle, he has to dehumanize you. You can't be his mother who bandaged his knees and taught him to read. You have to be the manipulative widow, the obstacle to what he believes is his due." The truth of her words settled over me. How do you fight that kind of narrative? Ashley's eyes, deep brown and wise, held mine. You don't fight the narrative, Deborah. You live your truth so plainly, so consistently, that the lie becomes unsustainable. And in the meantime, you remember who you really are, and you surround yourself with people who see you clearly. The legal battle dragged on through the summer, each filing more aggressive than the last. Benjamin's lawyer demanded access to Ryan's medical records going back 5 years, to every financial transaction, to private conversations between Ryan and his doctors. Thomas fought each motion methodically, his quiet competence a counterweight to the other lawyers' theatrics. I kept to my routine. Each morning, I pinned my hair back with the silver clip, walked the half-mile to the harbor offices, and immersed myself in the work. I learned the business more deeply than I had in all the decades supporting it from behind. I sat with Madison, reviewing tide charts and maintenance schedules. I met with the crews, learning names and stories and concerns. By midsummer, I knew every inch of Thomas Maritime not just as a bookkeeper, but as its steward. The crews, initially wary of the boss's widow, began to relax around me. They saw that I wasn't there to upend their world, but to understand it. One evening, as the sun was setting over the water, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, I stood on the main dock watching the day's last boats come in. The air smelled of salt and diesel, a scent I'd always associated with Ryan's return home. Mrs. Thomas, I turned to find a young man, maybe 20, in work clothes still damp from the day's labor. His face was familiar, but I couldn't place the name. "I'm Jason Caldwell," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Grace and Peter's son," I smiled, taking his hand. "Of course. How are your parents?" "They're good. Dad's new boat is working out well." He shifted his weight, seeming nervous. "I wanted to thank you for the scholarship. I start at the Maritime College next month." I hadn't realized he was one of the recipients. "That's wonderful. Jason, your parents must be proud." He nodded, his gaze moving out to the water and back. "They are, but I wanted you to know something else, too. The guys, we all hear the rumors. You know about the lawsuit and what your son is saying." My breath caught. I hadn't expected this conversation, certainly not here on the dock with the day fading around us. "I want you to know," he continued, his voice stronger now, "that everyone who actually works here, we know the truth. Mr. Thomas talked about you all the time. How you were the backbone of everything. How nothing would have been possible without you." The words touched something deep, a place I'd been protecting since this all began. "Thank you for telling me that." He nodded, looking embarrassed now. "Well, I should get home. Mom's making fish stew." As I watched him walk away, I felt something shift inside me. The narrative Benjamin was trying to create might be loud, but it wasn't the only story being told. The truth was also moving through this community, quieter perhaps, but no less powerful. That night, I wrote another letter I wouldn't send, this one not to Benjamin, but to Ryan. "I understand now why you love this place so much. It's not just the water or the boats or even the business we built. It's the web of lives connected to it. Each person has a story that ties back to this harbor, to the work we made possible. I never saw it quite so clearly until now, standing on my own. I placed the letter in the box with the others. A conversation continued across the divide of life and death, of hurt and healing. The next morning, Marina arrived with news that made my coffee go cold in my hand. "Benjamin's filed a new motion," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "He's asking the court to freeze all company assets pending the outcome of the case. If granted, it would essentially halt operations. No payroll, no purchases, no maintenance." The implications sank in immediately. That would cripple us. The crews, the suppliers, everyone depends on that cash flow. "Yes," she said. "And I think that's the point. He's escalating, trying to force a settlement by threatening not just you, but everyone connected to Thomas Maritime." I set my cup down, anger rising like a tide. "He's willing to hurt dozens of families to get his way. It appears so." "When is the hearing?" "Next Tuesday. Thomas is already preparing the counterarguments." I nodded, my mind racing ahead. We need to do more than counter. We need to go on offense. Can you get me everything we have on Benjamin's personal finances, the withdrawals from company accounts, any evidence of his meetings with developers? Everything. Marina's eyebrow raised slightly. Are you sure that's a significant escalation? I'm sure. Ryan protected this harbor and these people for 40 years. I won't let it all collapse because of one man's greed, even if that man is my son. The battle lines were drawn. No longer was this just about a mother and son, a will contested. This was about an entire community and the future Ryan had built so carefully. That evening, alone in the house with the sound of waves my only company, I took the silver hairpin from my hair and held it in my palm. The metal had warmed from being against my skin all day. I never wanted this fight, I whispered to the empty room. But I won't back down from it either. Outside, the tide was coming in, relentless and predictable. I thought of Ryan, of his quiet determination, of the way he'd weather storms at sea with a steady hand and clear eyes. I needed that strength now. As I placed the hairpin on the bedside table, my phone lit up with a text. Unknown number. Grandma, it's Lily. I need to see you. Don't tell Dad. Please. My heart stuttered. Benjamin's daughter, my only grandchild, 17 and fiercely independent, reaching out after months of silence. The last piece of my family I thought I'd lost entirely to this war. I texted back immediately. Of course. When and where? The reply came quickly. Tomorrow. The beach below your house. 2 p.m. I stared at the screen. Emotions colliding. Hope, fear, caution, love. I'd missed her desperately these past months, wondering if she believed the stories her parents were telling, wondering if she hated me now too. I'll be there, I replied. Then, after a moment, I've missed you. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I've missed you too. I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in this ongoing saga, but for tonight, in the quiet of this house by the sea, I allowed myself to feel the first bloom of something I hadn't expected to find in the midst of this battle. Hope. The beach below Ryan's house, our house now had always been a private sanctuary. A narrow path wound down from the back garden, through scrubby pine and wild roses, to a crescent of sand shielded by rocky outcroppings on either side. Ryan used to joke that it was our own little kingdom, hidden from the world. I arrived early, my heart fluttering with an anxiety I hadn't felt since Benjamin was a teenager. Coming home past curfew, I walked the shoreline, watching the waves curl and break, leaving foam lace on the sand. The silver hairpin caught the afternoon sun as I tucked a wayward strand behind my ear. At precisely 2 o'clock, I saw her silhouette at the top of the path. Lily, 17 and already taller than me. Her dark hair Ryan's color pulled back in a messy knot. She moved with that particular teenage gait, half confident, half uncertain, as if she hadn't quite grown into her own limbs yet. When she reached the bottom of the path, she hesitated. I waited, giving her the space to decide how this reunion would go. Then she was running, sand kicking up behind her, and I opened my arms just in time. She collided with me, solid and real, her face buried in my shoulder. Grandma, she mumbled into my cardigan, and I felt the dampness of tears. I held her tight, my own eyes stinging. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here. We stood like that for a long moment, the waves providing a soundtrack to our reunion. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. Let's sit, she said, gesturing to a large piece of driftwood that had served as a bench for as long as I could remember. Ryan had dragged it up past the tide line one summer, declaring it the perfect spot to watch sunsets. We settled side by side, shoulders touching. Lily twisted her hands in her lap, suddenly seeming much younger than 17. I'm sorry I haven't called, she began. Dad? He took my phone when I tried to reach you the first week. Said it was for my own good, that I shouldn't get involved in adult matters. Anger flashed through me, Benjamin controlling his daughter's contact with me, but I pushed it aside. This moment wasn't about him. "You're here now," I said simply. "That's what matters." She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so like her grandfather it made my chest tighten. "I know what they're saying about you," she said, her voice stronger now. "Mom talks about it when she thinks I can't hear. About how you manipulated Grandpa, how you're going to ruin the company." She turned to face me fully. "I don't believe it. Not one word." Relief washed through me, so strong it left me momentarily speechless. "Thank you," I managed finally. "That means more than you know. Grandpa used to talk to me, when I'd visit during school breaks and Dad was at work. He'd take me down to the harbor, show me around, tell me stories about the early days. He always talked about how none of it would have happened without you." I smiled, picturing Ryan with Lily at the docks, his weathered hand on her shoulder as he pointed out the boats, the same way he'd once done with Benjamin. "Did he tell you about the time the bank almost foreclosed on our first tugboat?" I asked. She shook her head, leaning in. "It was the first year of the business. We'd put everything we had into buying the Mariner, but we were still short on the monthly payments. The bank was threatening to take her back. I stayed up 3 nights straight, going through every account, every possible client. On the 3rd night, I found a billing error. An old client had underpaid by nearly $5,000. I called them at 6 in the morning, woke the poor accountant from a sound sleep, and by noon, we had the money. Paid the bank with 2 hours to spare." Lily laughed, a sound I'd missed desperately. "That sounds like you, always finding a way through." "Your grandfather called it my superpower, seeing the path when everyone else just saw the wall." Her smile faded, her expression turning serious again. "Dad's different now. He used to tell stories about you too, about how smart you were, how you could stretch a dollar further than anyone he knew. But now, it's like he's forgotten all of that." I reached for her hand, feeling the smooth skin, the bitten nails a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "People change when they're hurt or afraid. Your father feels like something's been taken from him. But it wasn't his to begin with," she said fiercely. "Grandpa built the company. You helped him. Dad just—" She broke off, looking guilty. "It's all right," I assured her. "You can speak your truth here." She took a deep breath. "Dad just acts entitled to it, like it was owed to him. And ever since Mom started pushing him to move to that development firm, it's like money is all that matters anymore." This was new information, a puzzle piece I hadn't possessed. "Jennifer's been encouraging him to work for a development company." Lily nodded. "Coastal Vista. They're the ones who want to buy the harbor land. She's friends with the owner's wife. They go to the same Pilates studio or something. Mom's been talking about how we could move to a bigger house in Seattle if Dad took the job they offered him." The picture was becoming clearer. Not just Benjamin's sense of entitlement, but Jennifer's ambitions, pushing him toward a future that would erase everything Ryan had built. "Does your father know you're here?" I asked gently. She looked down at the sand. "No. I told them I was studying at Mia's house. I had to see you. I had to know you were okay." My heart swelled. In the midst of all this ugliness, my granddaughter had risked her father's anger to check on me. "I'm more than okay," I assured her. "I have good people around me. And now, I have you too." She leaned against my shoulder, and we sat quietly for a few minutes, watching the waves. The tide was coming in, each surge reaching a little higher up the beach. "There's something else," Lily said finally. Her voice had dropped, as if she were afraid of being overheard, though there was no one else for miles. "I found something in Dad's office. I wasn't snooping, exactly. I was looking for my birth certificate for a school thing, and I found this file." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a manila folder. "It's about the lawsuit. There are emails. I don't understand all of it, but it doesn't seem right." I took the folder, my hands suddenly cold despite the warm afternoon. Inside were printouts of email exchanges between Benjamin and someone named Victor Renard at Coastal Vista Development. I skimmed the first page, then the second, my stomach tightening with each line. They were discussing strategy for the lawsuit. Not just discussing Coastal Vista was helping fund it. In exchange, They would get first rights to purchase the harbor property once Benjamin gained control. "When did you find this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "3 days ago. I've been trying to figure out what to do. If I should tell Dad I know, or—" She broke off, her voice catching. "I just want our family back. I want Dad to be Dad again. Not this person I don't recognize." I closed the folder and met her eyes. So young and yet carrying a burden no child should have to bear. "Listen to me," I said, taking both her hands in mine. "This isn't your responsibility to fix. You've done the right thing showing me, but now I need you to do something even harder." "What, Bo? Go home. Be normal. Don't let on that you've seen these or that you've been here." Her brow furrowed. "But your father is making choices I don't agree with." "But he's still your father. You're caught in the middle of something that should never have involved you. The best thing you can do right now is stay out of the crossfire." "I don't want to lose you again," she said, her voice small. I squeezed her hands. "You won't. I promise. We'll figure out a way to stay in touch that's safe for both of us. But right now, I need to know you're not in the line of fire when this all comes to a head." She nodded reluctantly. "Okay. But you'll let me know what happens." "As much as I can. Yes. And Lily, thank you. For believing in me. For being brave enough to come here." She hugged me again, fiercely, as if trying to pack months of missed embraces into one. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than you could ever know." I watched her climb back up the path, turning once at the top to wave before disappearing over the crest. When she was gone, I looked down at the folder in my hands. It contained enough evidence to blow Benjamin's case apart and possibly expose him to legal consequences of his own. But using it would mean putting Lily in an impossible position. It would mean revealing that she had taken documents from her father's office. Betrayed his trust. I walked slowly back to the house, the weight of decision heavy on my shoulders. Inside, I found Thomas and Marina at the kitchen table, laptops open, deep in preparation for Tuesday's hearing. They looked up as I entered, and something in my expression made Thomas frown. "What's happened?" he asked. I set the folder down between them. "My granddaughter paid me a visit, with some interesting reading material." They paged through the emails silently, the implications sinking in. When they finished, Thomas closed the folder with careful deliberation. "This is exactly what we need," he said. "Evidence of conspiracy, outside funding of the lawsuit, clear intent to sell the harbor despite knowing Ryan's wishes, but using it puts Lily in the middle," Marina finished, understanding immediately. "Yes," I sighed, sinking into a chair. "She's 17. If Benjamin finds out she brought these to me," Thomas nodded grimly, "it could permanently damage their relationship." "And she's already struggling with what her father's become," I added. "I won't make it worse by using her as ammunition in this fight." The room fell silent. The only sound the distant crash of waves and the ticking of the clock that had hung in this kitchen since Ryan and I bought the house. "There might be another way," Marina said finally. "These emails have dates, recipients, subject lines. We could subpoena them directly from Coastal Vista as part of discovery. The court can request them, and we'd get the same information without involving Lily." "Would that work?" I asked, looking to Thomas. He considered for a moment. "It's possible. It would mean broadening the scope of discovery, which Benjamin's lawyer will fight, but with the right judge—" He trailed off, thinking. "Leave it with me. I'll see what can be done." I nodded, relief mixing with renewed determination. "Whatever happens, Lily stays out of it. That's non-negotiable." "Agreed," they said in unison. That evening, after they'd gone, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery orange and deep purple. The tide was high now, waves crashing against the rocks below with a sound like distant thunder. I thought about Lily, about the courage it had taken for her to come to me. I thought about Benjamin, the little boy who'd once followed his father around the docks like a shadow, now willing to destroy everything Ryan had built for a chance at quick money and status. And I thought about Ryan himself, about what he would do in my position. The answer came clearly, as if he were sitting beside me, his hand warm on mine. He would protect the harbor. He would protect Lily. And he would face whatever storm came his way with his eyes open and his heart steady. "I'm trying, Ryan," I whispered to the darkening sky. "I'm really trying." In the distance, a gull cried out, its voice carrying over the sound of the sea. The breeze lifted my hair, and I reached up to touch the silver clip, cool against my fingertips. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. But tonight, for this moment, I was anchored. Tuesday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that makes you forget autumn is just around the corner. I stood in front of the bedroom mirror, fastening the silver hairpin with fingers that barely trembled. The hearing was set for 10 a.m. at the county courthouse, a solid brick building in the center of town that had witnessed generations of local disputes. Thomas had arrived at 7, mugs of coffee in hand, to go over our strategy one last time. "Judge Catherine Powell," he said as we sat at the kitchen table. "She's fair, thorough, and doesn't suffer fools. She'll see through theatrical tactics, which works in our favor." I nodded, trying to focus on the details instead of the knot in my stomach. And our approach simple, straightforward honesty. We present the evidence we have of Ryan's sound mind when he made his will, his clear intentions as documented in his journals and conversations with multiple witnesses, and we respectfully request that the freeze on assets be denied as it would cause undue hardship to innocent third parties, namely the employees and dependents of Thomas Maritime, and Benjamin's legal team. Thomas's mouth thinned. They'll push hard on the mental competence angle. They'll try to paint you as manipulative, controlling. They may bring up personal matters to try to rattle you. I took a deep breath. I'm ready. His eyes, kind behind his glasses, assessed me. "Yes, I believe you are." The courthouse steps were crowded when we arrived. Word had spread about the hearing, and it seemed half the town had turned out to watch. I saw familiar faces, harbor workers, shop owners, people who'd known Ryan and me for decades. Some nodded respectfully as we passed. Others looked away. Inside, the courtroom was already filling up. Benjamin and Jennifer sat at the front with their lawyer, Elliot Chambers, a lean man with expensive cufflinks and a smile that never reached his eyes. Benjamin didn't look my way, but Jennifer turned, her gaze cold and assessing, taking in my simple navy dress and pearls with a dismissive flick of her eyes. I sat beside Thomas at our table, Marina on my other side. Madison slipped in at the last minute, taking a seat directly behind us. His steady presence felt like a wall at my back. "All rise," the bailiff called, and Judge Powell entered. She was in her 60s, silver-haired and keen-eyed, with the brisk efficiency of someone who valued clarity above all. The proceedings began with Benjamin's lawyer outlining their case. His voice was practiced, persuasive, painting a picture of a grieving son cut out of his rightful inheritance by a stepmother who had taken advantage of his father's declining health. "Stepmother," Marina whispered, indignant. "You were married to Ryan for 41 years. I squeezed her hand, signaling for silence. "Let them show their hand first," Chambers continued, emphasizing Ryan's age at the time of the will change, insinuating that I had isolated him from his son during his final years, that the will represented not Ryan's wishes, but my influence. "Furthermore," he said, gesturing dramatically, "Mrs. Thomas has no experience running a maritime business. She was a bookkeeper, nothing more. In the 3 months since taking control, she has already made decisions that threaten the company's future stability. The freezing of assets is a necessary protective measure while this case proceeds. When it was our turn, Thomas rose with quiet dignity. He didn't match Chambers' theatrics. Instead, he laid out our case methodically, introducing the medical report confirming Ryan's competence, the journal entries in Ryan's own hand explaining his decision, affidavits from business associates who had discussed the matter with him. As for Mrs. Thomas's qualifications, Thomas said, she was not merely a bookkeeper, but the financial backbone of Thomas Maritime for 4 decades. Since taking the helm, company performance has remained steady, with all contractual obligations met and staff retained. The motion to freeze assets would not protect the company. It would cripple it, preventing payroll and necessary maintenance, harming the very business Mr. Benjamin Thomas claims to value. Judge Powell listened attentively to both sides, occasionally asking sharp, specific questions that cut through rhetoric to the heart of the matter. When both lawyers had finished their arguments, she turned to me directly. "Mrs. Thomas, would you care to make a statement to the court?" I hadn't expected this opportunity. Thomas looked surprised as well, but nodded encouragingly. I rose, smoothing my dress, and faced the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'll be brief." I took a steadying breath. My husband Ryan built Thomas Maritime from a single tugboat to the business it is today. He did it not just for profit, but because he believed in creating something lasting that would support our community. When he chose to leave the company to me, it wasn't a hasty decision or one made under duress. It was a choice based on shared values. I allowed myself a glance at Benjamin, who was staring straight ahead, jaw tight. Ryan and I both wanted our son to take over someday, but Ryan discovered that Benjamin had different plans for the harbor plans that would have ended its role as a working port and transformed it into condominiums and shopping centers. That discovery broke Ryan's heart, but it didn't change his love for our son. It simply changed his decision about the best steward for his life's work. Judge Powell's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were attentive. I've spent the last 3 months learning everything about running this company that I didn't already know from 40 years of supporting it from behind the scenes. The people who work for Thomas Maritime aren't just employees to me. They're families who depend on the steady operation of this business. Freezing the assets wouldn't punish me. Your Honor, it would punish them. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of the silver clip in my hair, a talisman of strength. I never wanted this fight. I still don't. But I will honor my husband's wishes and protect what he built, not out of spite or greed, but because he trusted me to do what was right, and I intend to live up to that trust. The courtroom was silent as I sat down. Thomas nodded slightly, approval in his eyes. Across the aisle, Chambers was leaning in, whispering urgently to Benjamin, whose face had flushed dark. Judge Powell adjusted her glasses, looking down at the papers before her. "I've heard enough for today. There are serious allegations on both sides that warrant careful consideration. However, regarding the immediate motion to freeze assets, I'm prepared to rule." She looked directly at Benjamin's table. "The motion is denied. I see no evidence of mismanagement that would justify such a drastic measure, and significant evidence that it would cause undue hardship to innocent parties. Thomas Maritime will continue operations as normal while this case proceeds." Chambers started to object, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "Additionally, I'm ordering an expanded discovery phase. Both parties will have full access to relevant documents, including communications between Benjamin Thomas and any third parties regarding the future of the harbor property." My heart skipped. Thomas had managed to get the subpoena for the Coastal Vista emails without revealing Lily's involvement. "We'll reconvene in 4 weeks for a full hearing." Court adjourned. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. Around us, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Thomas leaned close. "This is good. Better than expected. The expanded discovery gives us exactly what we need." Marina's hand found mine under the table, squeezing in silent victory. As we gathered our things to leave, I glanced up to find Benjamin staring at me from across the room, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might approach, might finally be ready to talk. Instead, he turned away, following his lawyer through a side door. Outside, the midday sun was bright, almost blinding after the dim courtroom. A small group of harbor workers stood on the steps, Madison among them. They nodded respectfully as I passed, a quiet affirmation that meant more than any legal victory. "First round to us," Thomas said as we walked to the car. "But the real battle is still to come." I nodded, watching a gull wheel overhead against the perfect blue sky. "At least we've bought time. The harbor is safe for now. And the expanded discovery will show exactly what Benjamin and Coastal Vista have been planning. Once it's all in the open, he'll have nowhere to hide," Thomas finished. That evening, the house felt strangely empty despite our small victory. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects, Ryan's reading glasses still on his desk, the collection of seashells we'd gathered over decades, the framed photo of all of us on Benjamin's college graduation day. In the image, his arm was slung around my shoulders, his face bright with promise and pride. Where had that young man gone? My phone chimed with a text. Unknown number again. Heard about the hearing. So proud of you. Will call when I can. Love you. Lily, using a friend's phone most likely. I texted back a simple heart, not wanting to say more in case the phone fell into the wrong hands. I carried my tea to the back porch and sat watching the moonlight on the water. The tide was out, revealing a stretch of wet sand that gleamed like polished silver. The victory today felt hollow without my family intact. I had protected the harbor, protected Ryan's legacy. But at what cost? Was there still a way back from this precipice? A path that led not just to legal vindication, but to healing? I don't know. Ryan, I whispered to the night air. I don't know if we can fix this. The ocean answered with its constant rhythm, waves breaking and retreating, unchanging yet never the same. I ran my fingers over the silver hairpin, feeling the tiny engraving on its surface. The date we'd launched the Mariner, the beginning of everything. So much water under the bridge since then. So many storms weathered. Perhaps this was just another storm. Perhaps on the other side, we would find our way back to shore, changed but intact. For tonight, it was enough to have held the line. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, its own choices. But as Ryan used to say when clouds gathered on the horizon, we can only steer the boat we're in, through the sea that's before us. I sipped my tea and listened to the waves, letting their steady voice wash over me like a benediction. 6 months later, the Ryan Thomas Scholarship Foundation office hummed with activity. The space, converted from an old chandlery at the edge of the harbor, smelled of fresh paint and brewing coffee. Morning light streamed through the windows, catching on the framed photograph of Ryan that hung on the wall behind my desk. Marina sat across from me, laptop open, reviewing the latest scholarship applications. We've got 17 candidates this round, she said, pushing her glasses up. 5 for Maritime College, 8 for trade programs, 4 for traditional universities. I nodded, pleased. More than last cycle, the word is spreading. It helps that the harbor's thriving. People see the stability and they want to be part of it. She was right. Despite the legal battles of the past months, Thomas Maritime had not just survived, but flourished. The expanded discovery had revealed exactly what we'd suspected: Benjamin's agreement with Coastal Vista to sell the harbor for condominium development once he gained control. The evidence had been damning, not just legally but in the court of public opinion. Judge Powell had ruled decisively in our favor, upholding Ryan's will and dismissing Benjamin's claims. The victory should have felt complete, but the personal wounds remained open, healing slowly, if at all. Benjamin and Jennifer had moved to Seattle shortly after the ruling. He'd taken the position with Coastal Vista after all, though their plans for our harbor were now permanently shelved. We hadn't spoken since the final day in court, when he'd walked past me without a word, Jennifer's hand gripping his arm like a vice. Lily was another matter. After the trial ended, she'd stood up to her parents, insisting on maintaining contact with me despite their objections. She visited every other weekend now, staying in her old room at the Sea House, helping with the Scholarship Foundation when she could. It was a fragile piece, this arrangement, but it was something. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Madison stood there, wind-roughened and solid as always. "Morning, Deborah, Marina." "Got a moment." I gestured him in. "Of course. Coffee." He shook his head. "Just wanted to let you know the Mariner's back from dry dock. Engine rebuild's complete. Good as new. Better. Maybe." I smiled. "Ryan would be pleased." "He would?" Madison hesitated, shifting his weight. "There's something else. Someone asking for you down at the main dock. Said it's important." "Who?" His expression gave nothing away. "Think you should see for yourself." "Curious." I grabbed my coat. The silver hairpin was already in place, as it had been every day since I'd reclaimed it. My talisman, my anchor, outside. The harbor was alive with morning activity. Fishing boats unloading their catch, maintenance crews at work, the steady business of the sea. I followed Madison past the main office, down to the central pier where the larger vessels docked. And there, standing at the edge of the dock, hands thrust in his pockets, was Benjamin. My steps faltered. He looked thinner, his face more lined than I remembered. The expensive suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a weathered jacket I recognized as one of Ryan's old ones. Madison touched my arm lightly. "I'll be over by the office if you need me," he said quietly, then retreated, giving us privacy. I approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. The space between us felt wider than the physical distance, a gulf carved by months of bitter conflict. "Benjamin," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Mom." He looked out at the water, not meeting my eyes. "Place looks good. Busy." "It is. We're having a strong season." He nodded, still gazing at the horizon. "Lily says you've expanded the scholarship program." "We have. 23 recipients last cycle. More coming in this round." A silence fell between us, filled with the cries of gulls and the creaking of boats against the dock. "I left Coastal Vista," he said finally, the words coming in a rush. "Last week. Couldn't do it anymore." I waited, sensing there was more. He turned to face me at last, his eyes so like Ryan's, troubled and weary. "I've been angry for so long. At Dad for changing the will. At you for fighting me. But mostly," he took a deep breath, "mostly at myself, for becoming someone I don't recognize." The admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way Benjamin hadn't been in years. "Jennifer left," he continued. "Said I was throwing away our future. Maybe I am. But I couldn't keep going down that road." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I hated to think of him hurting. He shrugged, a gesture so reminiscent of Ryan it made my heart clench. "It's been a long time coming. We want different things. Always have." Probably. Another silence. A fishing boat chugged past, the captain raising a hand in greeting to me. I returned the wave automatically. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad," Benjamin said, watching the boat's wake spread across the water. "About what he built here. What it meant to him. What he wanted it to mean to me." He paused. I didn't listen. I thought I knew better. "We all make mistakes," I said softly. "Some bigger than others." He met my eyes directly for the first time. "I've made a mess of things. Mom, with the company. With you. With Lily. I don't know if any of it can be fixed." The question hung between us, unspoken but clear. Was there a way back from this, a path to reconciliation? I thought of all the months of anger and hurt, the cruel words, the legal battles. I thought of how close we'd come to losing everything Ryan had built. But I also thought of the little boy who'd once followed his father around the docks, wide-eyed and full of dreams. "Fixing things takes time," I said carefully. "And work. Real work. Not just words." He nodded, accepting this without argument. "I know. I'm ready to put the time in, to do the work, if you'll let me try." I studied him, looking for signs of the old entitlement, the familiar hardness. Instead, I saw uncertainty, regret, and something else, an echo of Ryan's steadiness, buried deep, but still there. "Why don't we start with lunch?" I suggested. "The cafe at the harbor office still makes your father's favorite chowder." Relief flickered across his face. "I'd like that." As we walked toward the cafe, side by side but not touching, I felt the weight of the silver hairpin in my hair. Ryan's gift all those years ago, a reminder of storms weathered, of anchors that hold through the darkest nights. The path ahead would not be easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. But as we reached the cafe door, Benjamin held it open for me with a gesture that contained both deference and hope. "After you, Mom," he said quietly, and for the first time in months, I felt the sea change, the subtle shift that comes when the tide has reached its lowest point and begins, almost imperceptibly, to turn. I've learned that endings rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They arrive quietly, in small moments that only later reveal their significance. The same is true of beginnings. 1 year after Ryan's passing, I stood on the main dock at Thomas Maritime, watching as the newly refurbished Mariner prepared for her ceremonial return to service. The old tugboat gleamed in the morning sun, her hull freshly painted, the brass fittings polished to a mirror shine. On the deck, Benjamin moved with the easy confidence of someone who has found his place again. Over the past 6 months, he had worked his way from the bottom up, relearning the business from the waterline. No special treatment, no shortcuts, just honest work and gradual rebuilding of trust with the crews who had once seen him as the enemy. It hadn't been easy. There were days of awkward silences, of old hurts rising to the surface. Days when I wondered if we were fooling ourselves, trying to mend what had been so thoroughly broken. But there were other days, too. The afternoon Benjamin had stopped by the house to help fix the leaking roof gutter, working side by side with me in comfortable silence. The evening he'd joined a scholarship selection meeting, offering thoughtful insights on the candidates. Small steps, one after another, building a new path forward. Lily stood beside me now, tall and confident in her first year of maritime studies, her future stretching before her like an open sea. She linked her arm through mine as we watched Benjamin guide the final preparations. "He's different now," she said. "More like the dad I remember from when I was little." I nodded, seeing it too, the echoes of the man Benjamin had been before ambition and resentment hardened him. People can find their way back to themselves sometimes, if they want it badly enough. She squeezed my arm. "Like you did, after Grandpa died." I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. I too had been lost for a time, adrift in grief and betrayal. I too had found my way back, not to who I had been, but to who I needed to become. The ceremony was simple. Madison spoke briefly about the Mariner's history, the first vessel in the Thomas fleet, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. I said a few words about Ryan, about his vision for a company that would serve the community as much as it served itself. And then it was Benjamin's turn. He stood on the dock, the morning sun at his back, addressing the gathered crews and townspeople. "Many of you know that I lost my way for a while," he began, his voice carrying across the water. "I forgot what this place was really about, what my father built it to be. I was ready to trade something priceless for something worthless." A murmur ran through the crowd. This kind of raw honesty wasn't common in our small town, where people tended to paper over uncomfortable truths with politeness. "But someone reminded me what matters," he continued, his gaze finding mine in the crowd. "Someone had the courage to stand firm when it would have been easier to give in. My mother taught me that some legacies aren't measured in dollars, but in lives touched, in communities strengthened, in work that matters." My vision blurred slightly, and I blinked to clear it. Lily's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "Today, as we recommission the Mariner, I'm not just celebrating a boat. I'm celebrating a return to values, a commitment to continue what my father started, what my mother protected, and what I hope will continue for generations to come." He gestured, and a young crewman handed him a bottle of champagne, the traditional christening. But instead of stepping forward himself, Benjamin turned and held it out to me. "Mom, would you do the honors?" The crowd parted as I walked forward, the bottle cool in my hands. As I took my place beside Benjamin, he leaned close. "Thank you," he said softly, "for my ears alone, for not giving up on me, for being the anchor when I was lost at sea." I smiled, feeling the weight of the silver hairpin in my hair, the talisman that had seen me through the darkest days. Together, we swung the bottle, watching as it shattered against the Mariner's bow in a spray of foam and glass. The crowd cheered, and the tugboat's horn gave a long, triumphant blast that echoed across the harbor. In that moment, I felt Ryan's presence so strongly it was almost physical, a warm hand on my shoulder. a voice in the wind, not gone, just transformed. Present in the business that still bore his name, in the son who had found his way back, in the granddaughter who carried his spirit forward, and in me, the keeper of his legacy. The mariner pulled away from the dock, heading out toward open water, her wake spreading behind her like a path others could follow. I watched until she was just a speck on the horizon, Benjamin at my side, Lily on the other, the three of us bound not just by blood, but by something deeper, by choice, by forgiveness, by the steady work of rebuilding what had almost been lost. That night, as I stood on the back porch of the sea house watching the stars emerge over the water, I reached up and removed the silver hairpin. In the moonlight, the engraved date gleamed the launch of the first boat, the beginning of everything. For so long, I had worn it as armor, as a reminder of strength when I felt weak. But perhaps now, it could be something else, not a shield, but a key. Not protection from the past, but an opening to the future. Inside, I could hear Lily and Benjamin in the kitchen, their voices rising and falling in easy conversation as they prepared dinner. The sounds of family, of home, of healing. I slipped the hairpin into my pocket and turned toward the warm light spilling from the windows. The ocean would still be there tomorrow, constant in its changing. For tonight, it was enough to step inside, close the door against the sea wind, and join the people who were finding their way back to shore, changed by the journey. But finally, truly home. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to let me know which city you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel for more stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way through life's storms.